In the quiet village of Stargrove, a rare 18th century telescope vanishes from its observatory during a bustling fete, plunging the community into a web of suspicion. Enter Miss Jane Marple, whose gentle demeanour hides a razor-sharp mind. As whispers swirl around a debt-ridden astronomer, a nervous assistant, a curious visitor, and a prideful collector, Miss Marple unravels their secrets with her keen eye for human nature. A scratched lock, a shred of navy fabric, and a hidden van lead her to a cunning thief, proving that even in the calm of the countryside, no secret can outshine the truth. Chapter 1. The Vanishing Lens. The village of Stargrove, tucked into the gentle folds of the Cotswolds, wore its autumn charm like a well-worn shawl. Golden leaves drifted across cobbled lanes, and the air carried the crisp promise of evening. Miss Jane Marple, on a rare visit to her nephew Raymond West, had arrived in Stargrove seeking respite from the bustle of St. Mary Mead. Raymond, ever the doting nephew, had insisted she attend the village fete, a quaint affair celebrating the local observatory's legacy. "Aunt Jane," he'd said, eyes twinkling, "you'll find the stars here far more intriguing than village gossip." Miss Marple, with her mild smile and sharper mind, had agreed, though she knew people, not stars, were the true constellations of any mystery. The observatory perched on a hill overlooking Stargrove, its white dome gleaming like a pearl against the dusky sky. It housed a treasure, a rare 18th century refracting telescope, crafted by John Dolland, its lenses so precise they could capture the faint glow of distant galaxies. Scholars and enthusiasts alike revered it, and the fate had drawn a crowd eager to peer through its storied eyepiece. Miss Marple, her grey hair tucked neatly beneath a sensible hat, mingled among the villagers, her eyes catching the flicker of excitement in their faces. Children clutched balloons, vendors hawked toffee apples, and a brass band played a slightly off-key rendition of a popular tune. Yet her attention lingered on the observatory, where a steady stream of visitors flowed in and out. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of violet, a piercing shout shattered the festive hum. Miss Marple, standing near a stall selling lavender sachets, turned toward the sound. It came from the observatory. A small crowd was already gathering, their murmurs rising like a tide. She made her way up the hill, her steps measured but purposeful, her black lace-up shoes crunching on the gravel path. At the dome's entrance stood Dr. Henry Grayson, the observatory's director, his thin frame trembling with agitation. His spectacles glinted in the lantern light as he gestured wildly. "It's gone!" he cried, his voice cracking. "The Dolland telescope stolen!" Miss Marple slipped quietly into the circle of onlookers, her unassuming presence drawing little notice. Dr. Grayson, his face pale as the moon, was addressing a burly constable who scribbled notes with a furrowed brow. Beside Grayson stood Clara Finch, his young assistant, her hands twisting the hem of her cardigan. Her dark eyes darted nervously as if seeking an escape from the chaos. Nearby, a stranger, Mr. Lionel Brent, Miss Marple learned from a whispered aside, watched with an air of detached curiosity, his fingers adjusting the rim of his spectacles. The villagers buzzed with speculation, their voices a tangle of shock and suspicion. Miss Marple's gaze swept the scene, noting the observatory's heavy oak door, its lock gleaming but untested in her mind. The dome itself, a marvel of engineering, seemed impregnable, yet the telescope, a cumbersome instrument requiring 2 men to lift, had vanished without a trace. She approached Dr. Grayson, her voice soft as a summer breeze. "A dreadful loss, Doctor." "Grayson, when was the telescope last seen?" Grayson blinked, startled by her calm demeanour. "At 6 o'clock, he replied, "during the public viewing. I checked it myself before joining the Fate Committee for supper. By 9, when I returned to secure the dome, it was gone." His hands fluttered like startled birds. "No one could have entered without the key. I keep it on my person always." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes lingering on the keyring dangling from his waistcoat. "A great many people were about this evening," she remarked, almost to herself. "Fate do bring out the curious, don't they?" She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Fete, where a silver cup had disappeared amid the revelry, only to be found in a magpie's nest. People she knew were far less predictable than birds. Clara Finch, catching Miss Marple's glance, stepped forward. "I was with the visitors all evening," she said quickly, her voice sharp. "Guiding them, answering questions. I didn't see anything unusual." Her fingers tightened on her cardigan, and Miss Marple noted the faint tremor in them. Mr. Brent, hovering at the edge of the group, offered a polite nod. "A tragedy for science," he said, his tone measured. "I was here for the viewing, but I spent most of the evening sketching the grounds. Such a charming place." His smile was pleasant, yet Miss Marple sensed a watchfulness behind it, like a cat studying a mouse. The constable, Inspector Reed, cleared his throat. "We'll need statements from everyone," he declared, his pencil poised. "No one leaves until we've sorted this out." The crowd murmured, some indignant, others intrigued. Miss Marple, however, retreated to a bench overlooking the valley, her knitting bag at her side. As the stars emerged, pinpricks of light in the velvet sky, her mind began to map the evening's events. A telescope did not vanish on its own, she mused. Someone had seen opportunity in the fates' chaos, and she intended to find out who. In St. Mary Mead, she had once solved the theft of a vicar's arms, boxed by noting a child's sticky fingers and a mother's hasty excuse. Here, the stakes were higher, the players more complex. Yet human nature, Miss Marple knew, was the same under any sky. As the observatory dome loomed against the night, she felt the familiar stir of a puzzle taking shape, its pieces scattered but not beyond her reach. Chapter 2. The Astronomer's Tale. The morning after the theft, Stargrove awoke under a veil of mist, the village's thatched roofs and stone walls softened by the damp air. Miss Jane Marple, seated at her nephew Raymond's breakfast table, sipped tea and nibbled a slice of buttered toast, her thoughts far from the pleasantries of the meal. Raymond, a writer with a penchant for romanticizing the mundane, was regaling her with tales of the fate's success, oblivious to the shadow cast by the observatory's loss. "Aunt Jane," he said, spreading marmalade with enthusiasm, "you should have seen the children's faces at the telescope viewing. Pure wonder." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind fixed on less innocent wonders. The theft of the Dollond telescope was no child's prank. It was a calculated act, and she intended to unravel it. At 10:30 she set out for the observatory, her black shawl draped over her shoulders and her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. Dr. Henry Grayson had invited her to tea, an invitation she suspected was born more of nervous agitation than hospitality. The observatory stood sentinel on its hill, its dome catching the weak sunlight like a polished shield. As she climbed the gravel path, Miss Marple noted the quiet that had settled over Stargrove, a stark contrast to the previous evening's revelry. The fete's banners still fluttered limply, remnants of a celebration now tainted by scandal. Dr. Grayson greeted her at the observatory's entrance. His thin frame stooped as if the theft had aged him overnight. His study, a cluttered sanctuary of books, star charts, and astronomical instruments, smelled of old paper and beeswax polish. A fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows across shelves crammed with volumes on celestial mechanics. Grayson motioned her to a worn leather chair, his hands trembling as he poured tea from a chipped pot. "Miss Marple," he began, his voice strained, "I scarcely slept. That telescope, it's not just an instrument, it's history, precision, a legacy." His spectacles slipped down his nose, and he pushed them back with a distracted air. Miss Marple accepted her cup, her eyes scanning the room. A brass orrery sat on a side table, its planets frozen mid-orbit, and a stack of unpaid bills peeked from beneath a journal. "A dreadful shock, Doctor." "Grayson," she said softly, her tone inviting confidence, "perhaps you could tell me more about the evening. Every detail helps. You know, she thought of a saint. Mary Mead widow, who had solved a theft by recalling the exact placement of a teacup. Details she knew were the threads of truth." Grayson sank into his chair, his fingers drumming on the armrest. "The telescope was in perfect order at 6 o'clock, he said. I checked it myself before the public viewing began. The fete was in full swing. Villagers, visitors, children everywhere. I allowed groups into the dome, 10 at a time, to look through the eyepiece. Clara, my assistant, managed the queue. By 7, I left to join the fake committee for supper at the village hall. I locked the dome myself. Here's the key." He patted his waistcoat pocket, where a heavy iron key jingled. "I returned at 9 to close up, and the telescope was gone. Vanished. The lock was untouched, the door secure. It's impossible." Miss Marple's needles clicked as she drew a skein of wool from her bag, her hands moving with the calm rhythm of habit. "Impossible is a strong word, Doctor." "Grayson," she remarked, her eyes meeting his, "locks are only as secure as the hands that hold their keys. Were you alone when you checked the telescope at 6? Her question was gentle, but her gaze was sharp, like sunlight piercing fog. Grayson hesitated, his fingers tightening around his teacup. "Well, yes, I suppose. Clara was outside with the visitors, and I was adjusting the lens, but no one else was in the dome. I'd have seen them." His voice rose, tinged with defensiveness. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. She noted the faint flush on his cheeks, the way his eyes darted to the window. "And the key," she continued. "You kept it with you all evening." "Always," he said firmly. "It never leaves my person. The observatory is my responsibility." Yet his hand lingered on the keyring, as if reassuring himself of its presence. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over his words. In St. Mary Mead, a verger had once sworn his church key never left his pocket, yet a clever choir boy had slipped it free during a handshake. People, she reflected, often overestimated their vigilance. She steered the conversation to the observatory's operations. "It must be costly, maintaining such a place," she said, glancing at the bills on the table. Grayson's face tightened. "It is," he admitted. "Grants are scarce, and equipment is dear. The telescope was insured, of course, a fortune really, but no money could replace it." His voice wavered, and Miss Marple wondered if it was grief for the telescope, or fear of its implications. An insurance payout could ease his debts, she thought, recalling a saint. Mary Mead Grocer, who had staged a burglary to claim a tidy sum. Greed, she knew, could masquerade as despair. "And your assistant, Miss Finch," Miss Marple said, her tone conversational. "She seems devoted to her work. A great help, I imagine." Grayson nodded, though his enthusiasm was tepid. "Clara's capable," he said, "ambitious perhaps too much so. She's eager for her own research, but funds are tight. She manages the visitors, keeps the records. I couldn't run this place without her." His words were kind, but his eyes held a flicker of unease. Miss Marple filed it away, thinking of a saint, Mary Mead schoolmistress, whose loyalty masked a grudge against her employer. As they spoke, the study door creaked open, and Clara Finch appeared, carrying a tray of biscuits. Her dark hair was pinned neatly, but her eyes were red-rimmed, as if she'd been crying or sleepless. "I thought you might like these," she said, setting the tray down with a slight tremble. Miss Marple thanked her, noting the way Clara's gaze flicked to Grayson, then away. "A trying time for you, Miss Finch," she said kindly. "You must feel the loss keenly." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's awful," she said. "The telescope was extraordinary." "I was with the visitors all evening, so I didn't see anything, but I wish I had." Her words were earnest, yet Miss Marple caught a note of strain, like a string stretched too tight. Clara excused herself quickly, and Miss Marple's needles paused. Young women, she thought, could hide much behind efficiency. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead maid, who had concealed a theft behind tearful protestations of innocence. Grayson resumed his lament, detailing the telescope's history, its craftsmanship, its role in mapping distant stars. Miss Marple listened, her mind sifting his words for inconsistencies. He spoke of the fete's chaos, the crowds that milled about the grounds, yet insisted no stranger could have entered the dome unnoticed. "The villagers are honest folk," he said, "but we had outsiders, tourists, enthusiasts." That Mr. Brent, for instance, was asking all sorts of questions about the telescope. Too curious, if you ask me. Miss Marple's interest sharpened. "Mr. Brent, the visitor?" she asked, her voice mild. "He seemed quite taken with the observatory." Grayson nodded, his brow furrowing. "He's an amateur astronomer, or so he says. Kept sketching the grounds, poking about. I didn't like his manner. Too smooth, too interested." Miss Marple smiled faintly, thinking of a saint. Mary Mead newcomer whose charm had masked a penchant for pilfering. Curiosity, she knew, could be a cloak for intent. As the conversation wound down, Miss Marple rose, smoothing her skirt. "You've been most helpful, Doctor." "Grayson," she said, "I'm sure the constable will find the culprit soon." She paused at the door, her eyes lingering on the orrery. "People do the strangest things for money, don't they?" she remarked, almost to herself. Grayson started, his teacup clattering in its saucer. "I suppose so," he muttered, avoiding her gaze. Outside, the mist had lifted, revealing Stargrove's patchwork fields and distant manor houses. Miss Marple walked slowly down the hill, her mind as busy as her needles. Grayson's financial troubles were clear, and his insistence on the key's security felt rehearsed. The telescope's insurance loomed large, a motive as old as avarice itself. Yet Clara's nervous demeanour and Brent's probing curiosity tugged at her thoughts. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who had blamed a theft on gypsies, only to be caught with the stolen goods in his shed. Deflection, she knew, was a common tactic. As she reached the village square, Miss Marple paused by the church, its spire piercing the sky like a needle. The telescope's theft was no simple smash and grab. It required planning, access, and nerve. Grayson held the key, but keys could be borrowed or copied. Clara's ambition might push her to desperate acts, and Brent's interest felt too keen for a casual visitor. Then there was the whisper of Sir Reginald Vane, the collector whose name had surfaced in village gossip. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen brooch had led her to a collector's attic. Here, the trail might lead to a Manners display case. She made her way to Raymond's cottage, her steps light despite the weight of her thoughts. The telescope was a star in Stargrove's firmament, and its absence cast a shadow over the village. Miss Marple knew that shadows revealed as much as light, and she was determined to follow their edges. As she settled into an armchair with her knitting, she pictured the observatory dome, its lock gleaming, its secrets hidden. People, she murmured, her needles clicking, are never quite what they seem. But their patterns always show through. The day stretched ahead, promising further conversations, subtle questions, and the quiet observation that had solved many a puzzle in St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she envisioned the threads of this mystery weaving together, each suspect a stitch in a tapestry yet to be completed. Chapter 3. The Assistant's Alibi. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Stargrove's cobbled streets, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the observatory's library, where Clara Finch had agreed to meet her. The village was abuzz with whispers of the stolen telescope, each gossip adding a new flourish to the tale. Miss Marple, her black shawl neatly pinned and her knitting bag tucked under her arm, moved with the unhurried grace of one who knew haste obscured truth. She had seen it before in St. Mary Mead, a missing locket blamed on a passing tramp, when the culprit was a neighbour's envy. Clara Finch, with her quick eyes and nervous hands, was a thread in this mystery, and Miss Marple intended to tug gently to see what unravelled. The observatory library was a quiet haven, its high windows admitting slants of light that danced on rows of leather-bound volumes. Star charts hung on the walls, their intricate lines tracing paths through the heavens, and a faint scent of ink and dust lingered in the air. Clara sat at a long oak table, surrounded by open books and a ledger, her pen scratching notes with determined precision. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating the pallor of her face, and her fingers twitched as she set the pen down to greet her visitor. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice clipped but polite. "Doctor." "Grayson said you wanted to speak with me. I'm afraid I'm rather busy." Miss Marple smiled, settling into a chair opposite Clara, her needles emerging from her bag like old friends. "Oh, my dear, I shan't keep you long," she said, her tone as soothing as a lullaby. "I only thought you might help clarify a few things about the fete." "It's so easy to miss details in all that bustle, isn't it?" She began to knit, the soft click of her needles a steady counterpoint to Clara's restless energy. The young woman's eyes flicked to the wool, then back to her ledger, as if seeking refuge in its order. Clara leaned back, her hands folding tightly in her lap. "I told the constable everything," she said. "I was with the visitors from 5 until well past 8, guiding them through the observatory, explaining the telescope's history. I never left the group, not once, by the time I finished doctor." Grayson was locking the dome, and then, well, you know what happened. Her voice held a note of defiance, but her fingers betrayed her, twisting a stray thread on her sleeve. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but searching. "Such a responsibility, managing all those people," she said. "I imagine it was quite hectic with everyone so eager to see the telescope." "Did you notice anything unusual? A face out of place, perhaps, or someone lingering where they shouldn't?" She thought of a saint, Mary Mid-Fete, where a maid's fleeting glance at a stranger had revealed a pickpocket scheme. Small gestures, she knew, could speak volumes. Clara shook her head, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Nothing," she said. "It was all a blur. Villagers, children, tourists." I was too busy answering questions to notice much else. Mr. Brent was there, asking about the telescope's optics, but he was just curious, like the others. Her voice faltered slightly on Brent's name, and Miss Marple's needles paused, just for a moment. "Curious people can be so tiresome, can't they?" she remarked, her tone light. "Always wanting to know more than one has time to tell." Clara's eyes met hers, then darted away. He was persistent, she admitted, kept asking about the telescope's value, its maker. "I thought he was just an enthusiast." She hesitated, then added, "I did see him near the dome later, around dusk." "He was sketching, or so he said." Her words carried a hint of accusation, and Miss Marple noted the way Clara's shoulders stiffened, as if unburdening herself of a suspicion. "Sketching," Miss Marple repeated, her needles resuming their rhythm. "How interesting! I suppose the observatory is quite picturesque, with its dome and all." She smiled, but her mind was elsewhere, recalling a St. Mary Mead artist who had used sketching as a pretext to case a vicarage for silver. Brent's presence near the dome warranted scrutiny, but Clara's eagerness to point to him felt like a stitch pulled too tight. Was it truth, or a deflection? Miss Marple steered the conversation to Clara's work. "You must be very dedicated, my dear," she said. "Astronomy is such a demanding field, and you so young." "I imagine, Doctor. Grayson relies on you a great deal." Clara's face softened, but only slightly. "He does," she said. "I manage the records, assist with observations, even write grant proposals. But it's not easy. The observatory's funds are limited." Her voice held a trace of bitterness, and Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. Limited funds, she thought, could breed desperation. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Clark, who had pilfered church funds to cover a gambling debt, his loyalty undone by want. "And your own studies?" Miss Marple asked, her tone gentle. "You must have ambitions of your own." Clara's expression tightened, her fingers stilling. "I do," she said. "I'm working on a paper about variable stars, but it's hard to find time. Dr. Grayson keeps me busy, and there's no money for extra equipment." She stopped abruptly, as if regretting her candor. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her needles clicking. "Young people are so passionate," she said, almost to herself. "But passion can blind one to opportunity, can't it?" Clara's eyes widened, a flash of alarm crossing her face before she masked it with a forced smile. "I suppose so," she said, standing to adjust a stack of books. "But I had no opportunity to take the telescope, if that's what you mean." "I was with the visitors all evening." Her voice was firm, but her hands betrayed her, fumbling with the books. Miss Marple watched, her mind sifting through the girl's words. In St. Mary Mead, a young seamstress had sworn she was too busy to steal a bolt of silk, yet her nervous hands had given her away. The library door opened, and a groundskeeper poked his head in, delivering a message about a delivery of coal. Clara seized the chance to excuse herself, promising to return shortly. Miss Marple remained seated, her eyes roaming the room. A photograph on the table caught her attention. Clara and Grayson standing beside the telescope, both smiling, though Clara's smile seemed strained. Behind them, the dome's interior was visible, its walls lined with tools and a small cabinet. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the cabinet, wondering what it held. Keys, perhaps, or something less tangible, like secrets. She rose and approached the star charts, feigning interest while her mind worked. Clara's alibi was solid, too solid, perhaps, like a rehearsed line. Her mention of Brent felt calculated, and her bitterness about funds suggested a motive, however faint. Miss Marple thought of the ancient telescope, its bulk requiring strength and planning to move. Clara was slight, but determination could overcome physical limits, as she'd seen in a saint. Mary Mead girl, who had carried off a heavy candelabra for spite. As Clara returned, Miss Marple resumed her seat, her smile as warm as ever. "You've been so helpful, my dear," she said. "I won't take more of your time." "But do tell me, was the dome always so secure?" "I noticed it's quite a sturdy lock." Clara hesitated, her fingers brushing the ledger. "It's always locked," she said. "Dr. Grayson is particular about that. Only he has the key." Her words echoed Grayson's, and Miss Marple's needles clicked faster. Such agreement, she thought, could be collusion or habit. In St. Mary Mead, a butler and his mistress had sworn to identical alibis, only to be undone by a misplaced glove. Miss Marple thanked Clara and made her way out, pausing at the library door to glance back. Clara was already bent over her ledger, but her pen was still, her eyes fixed on the page as if seeing something else entirely. Miss Marple stepped into the cool afternoon, the observatory's dome looming above her. Clara's nervousness, Brent's curiosity, Grayson's key, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the pattern was not yet clear. She thought of a saint. Mary Mead quilt stolen from a church sale. Its theft traced to a woman whose perfect alibi hid a partner's guilt. Partners, she mused, could complicate even the simplest crimes. As she walked back to Raymond's cottage, the village seemed to watch her, its windows like eyes holding secrets. Clara's ambition, her strained loyalty, and her quickness to point to Brent formed a constellation in Miss Marple's mind, but it was incomplete. The telescope's theft required opportunity, and Clara's crowded evening offered little, unless she had help. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. People she knew were like stars. Their brilliance was plain, but their true paths required patient observation. She would watch and wait and knit until the truth emerged from the shadows. Chapter 4. The Curious Visitor. The late afternoon light bathed Stargrove in a golden haze, softening the edges of its stone cottages and casting long shadows across the village green. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting bag tucked under her arm, strolled toward the Stargrove Inn, where Mr. Lionel Brent, the enigmatic visitor, was staying. The inn, a timbered building with ivy clinging to its walls, exuded the cosy charm of rural England, but Miss Marple's thoughts were far from cosy. The theft of the Dollond telescope was a puzzle with too many edges, and Brent, with his polished manners and probing questions, was a piece that didn't quite fit. In St. Mary Mead, she had once unmasked a thief posing as a bird-watcher, his binoculars trained on silver rather than sparrows. People, she mused, often hid their intentions behind harmless hobbies. She found Brent in Cheated the inn's garden, seated at a wrought-iron table with a sketchbook open before him. His pencil moved swiftly, tracing the arcs of imagined constellations against a backdrop of the observatory's dome, visible on the hill. His spectacles glinted as he looked up, his smile polite but guarded. "Miss Marple," he said, rising with a slight bow. "What a pleasant surprise. Care to join me?" His voice was smooth, with a trace of a London accent, and his navy suit was impeccably pressed, a contrast to the village's rustic simplicity. Miss Marple settled onto a chair, her shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "How kind are you, Mr. Brent," she said, her tone as warm as the tea the innkeeper brought out. "I see you're sketching the stars." Such a fascinating pastime. Her needles emerged from her bag, clicking softly as she began to knit, her eyes never leaving Brent's face. She noted the way his fingers tightened on the pencil, the faint crease in his brow. "The observatory must be a delight for someone like you," she added, "so full of history." Brent nodded, his smile unwavering. "It's a gem," he said. "That telescope, Dollond's work, you know, was a marvel of 18th century optics. I came to Stargrove just to see it." He flipped a page in his sketchbook, revealing a detailed drawing of the observatory's dome, its curves rendered with almost obsessive precision. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with interest. "Such skill," she said. "You must have spent a good deal of time studying the place." Brent's smile flickered, just for a moment. "I was there during the fete," he said. "Wandered the grounds, sketched a bit. The crowds were distracting, but I managed a few good views of the dome." He gestured toward the hill, his hands steady but his eyes watchful. Miss Marple nodded, thinking of a saint. Mary Mead painter who had lingered too long near a manor's open window, his sketches a pretext for theft. "And did you go inside?" she asked, her voice mild as a summer breeze. "The telescope must have been a sight." Brent adjusted his spectacles, a gesture Miss Marple noted as deliberate. "I did briefly," he admitted, "during the public viewing at 6. Miss Finch was explaining its workings, quite knowledgeable, that young woman. But I didn't stay long. Too many people." He paused, then added, "I was back outside by dusk sketching near the gate. Saw nothing out of the ordinary." His tone was casual, but Miss Marple caught the careful phrasing, the way his eyes lingered on her, as if gauging her reaction. She smiled, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Dusk is such a lovely time," she said. "Everything's so soft and shadowy. It's easy to miss things, isn't it? Or to see what others overlook." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who had claimed ignorance of a stolen rose bush, yet knew its exact planting date. Brent's sketches, she suspected, might reveal more than constellations. "Did you notice anyone near the dome?" she asked, her tone conversational. "Someone who seemed out of place?" Brent's pencil tapped the sketchbook, a faint rhythm of unease. "Not really," he said. "There was a groundskeeper, I think, and some villagers." "Oh, and a man in a dark jacket. Looked like a chauffeur, maybe. He was smoking by the gate, but I didn't pay much mind." His words were offhand, yet Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind latching onto the detail. A chauffeur, she thought, perhaps connected to Sir Reginald Vane, the collector whose name hovered like a spectre over the village's gossip. In St. Mary Mead, a stranger's loitering had once led her to a poacher's stash. Here, a chauffeur's presence might point to a grander scheme. She sipped her tea, her eyes soft but piercing. "You must know a great deal about telescopes, Mr. Brent," she said. "To sketch them so well, I mean. Are you a collector, perhaps?" Her question was gentle, but it landed like a pebble in still water. Brent's smile tightened, and he closed his sketchbook with a soft thud. "Not a collector," he said, "just an enthusiast. I study optics, history, that sort of thing. The Dolland was unique. A shame it's gone." His voice held a note of regret, but Miss Marple wondered if it was for the telescope or his own exposure. She changed tack, her tone as light as ever. "The fete must have been quite a contrast to your usual pursuits," she said. "All that noise and bustle. I imagine you prefer quieter moments, like your sketching." Brent relaxed slightly, his shoulders easing. "I do," he said. "Crowds are tiresome. I spent most of the evening away from the hubbub, just me and my pencil." He gestured to the sketchbook, and Miss Marple noted the way his fingers lingered on its cover, as if protecting its contents. "May I see?" she asked, her smile disarming. Brent hesitated, then opened the book, revealing pages of meticulous drawings. The observatory's dome, its ironwork gate, even the telescope itself sketched from memory. The detail was remarkable, but Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to a small notation in the corner of one sketch, a measurement in inches of the dome's base. "How precise," she remarked, her voice warm. "You have an eye for detail." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Surveyor, whose measurements had mapped a burglary's escape route, not a building's foundation. Brent closed the book again, his smile returning. "Just a hobby," he said. "Keeps my mind sharp." Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their dance. "A sharp mind is a wonderful thing," she said. "It sees what others miss, doesn't it?" She rose, thanking him for the tea and his company, her eyes lingering on his sketchbook. As she stepped back into the village, the inn's garden fading behind her, she felt the puzzle's pieces shifting. Brent's curiosity was too keen, his sketches too precise, and his mention of the chauffeur too convenient. In St. Mary Mead, a newcomer's charm had once masked a pilferer's intent. Here, Brent's polish might hide something darker. The village was settling into evening, lamps glowing in cottage windows as the sky deepened to indigo. Miss Marple walked slowly, her mind tracing the evening of the theft. Brent had been near the dome at dusk, a time when shadows cloaked mischief. His sketches suggested a deeper interest in the observatory's layout, and his mention of the chauffeur felt like a breadcrumb tossed to distract. Yet his calm demeanour was unshaken, his story consistent. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Vicar, who had deflected suspicion with a serene smile, only to be caught with a stolen chalice in his study. Smiles, she knew, could be masks. As she reached Raymond's cottage, Miss Marple paused by the gate, her eyes lifting to the stars now pricking the sky. Brent was a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole picture. Clara's nervousness, Grayson's key, and the whisper of Sir Reginald Vane formed a constellation that was still incomplete. She thought of the telescope, its lenses crafted to reveal distant truths now hidden by human cunning. "People," she murmured, her needles tucked away, "are like stars. They shine brightly, but their secrets lie in the spaces between." She would need to see more of Brent's spaces, and those of the others before the truth came into focus. Chapter 5. The Collector's Shadow. The morning mist hung low over Stargrove, draping the village in a gauzy veil that muted the chatter of sparrows and the clatter of milk cans. Miss Jane Marple, fortified by a cup of tea, and her nephew Raymond's insistence that she solve the mystery before luncheon, set out for the manor of Sir Reginald Vane, the reclusive collector whose name had surfaced in the village's murmured speculations. Her black shawl was pinned neatly, her knitting bag a familiar weight at her side, and her mind as sharp as the autumn air. In St. Mary Mead, she had once traced a stolen brooch to a magpie-minded spinster whose obsession with trinkets betrayed her. Here, a collector's pride might hold the key to the missing Dolland telescope. The Vane estate, a mile beyond Stargrove's borders, was a sprawl of ivy-clad stone, its chimneys piercing the mist like sentinels. Miss Marple had secured an invitation through Mrs. Elspeth Harrow, a local widow and mutual acquaintance who was hosting a charity tea at the manor. As she approached the wrought-iron gates, she noted the manicured lawns and the faint hum of a motor from the stables, where a sleek black van was parked. A chauffeur, his navy jacket crisp despite the early hour, polished the vehicle's hood with methodical care. Miss Marple's eyes lingered on him, recalling Mr. Brent's mention of a man in a dark jacket near the observatory gate. In St. Mary Mead, a groom's loitering had once led her to a pilfered saddle. Small details, she knew, could unravel grand schemes. Mrs. Harrow greeted her at the manor's entrance, her plump cheeks flushed with the excitement of hosting. "Miss Marple, how good of you to come!" she exclaimed, ushering her into a grand hall, where guests mingled over scones and silver teapots. The air was thick with the scent of lavender and polished wood, and Miss Marple's gaze swept the room, noting the glass cabinets lining the walls. Clocks ticked with mechanical precision, barometers gleamed, and telescopes, lesser cousins of the Dolland, stood like silent sentries. Sir Reginald Vane, a portly man with a mane of silver hair and a smile that did not reach his eyes, moved among the guests, his voice booming with practiced charm. Miss Marple, accepting a cup of tea, positioned herself near a cabinet to study its contents. A brass sextant, a gilt astrolabe, and a collection of lenses sparkled under the chandelier's light. But her eyes were drawn to a velvet-lined shelf, where a gap stood out, its dimensions eerily suited to the missing telescope. She sipped her tea, her needles clicking softly as she knitted, her presence as unobtrusive as a shadow. In St. Mary Mead, a vacant space in a jeweller's case had pointed to a thief's intent. Here, the empty shelf whispered of ambition. Sir Reginald approached, his manner courteous but guarded. "Miss Marple, is it?" he said, his voice smooth as polished oak. "Mrs. Harrow speaks highly of you. Are you an admirer of scientific instruments?" His eyes, cold and calculating, belied his smile, and Miss Marple met them with her own mild gaze. "Oh, I'm just a visitor to Stargrove," she said, her tone light. "But I do find such collections fascinating, so many treasures. You must be very proud." Her needles paused, and she tilted her head, as if inviting him to elaborate. Vane's chest puffed slightly, his pride evident. "I've spent years acquiring these pieces," he said, gesturing to the cabinets, "each one a marvel of craftsmanship. The Dolland telescope, though, such a pity about its loss. A masterpiece, but I've no need for stolen goods. My collection is entirely legitimate." His words were firm, almost rehearsed, and Miss Marple noted the way his hand brushed the edge of the empty shelf, as if drawn to it unconsciously. "Legitimate, of course," she said, her smile unwavering. "Though collectors, I find, are often tempted by the rarest prizes. Like magpies, don't you think?" drawn to what shines? She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Widow, who had coveted a neighbour's rare lace, hiding it in her attic for no purpose but possession. Vane's smile tightened, and he changed the subject, offering her a scone with a flourish. Miss Marple accepted it, her eyes catching the glint of a gold ring on his finger, engraved with a star, a detail she filed away. As the tea progressed, Miss Marple drifted through the hall, her ears attuned to the guests' chatter. A local squire mentioned Vane's recent purchase of a questionable astrolabe, hinting at less than honest dealings. A maid clearing plates whispered to another about Vane's late-night visitors, always coming and going in that van. Miss Marple's needles clicked faster, her mind weaving these threads into the tapestry of the theft. The van, the chauffeur, the empty shelf, each was a clue, but none yet conclusive. In St. Mary Mead, a merchant's secret deliveries had led to a cache of stolen silver. Here, Vane's manor might hold more than curiosities. Mrs. Harrow, bustling over, drew Miss Marple aside. "Isn't Sir Reginald splendid?" she said. "He's promised a donation for the village hall, though he was odd about the fete. Said he was here all evening, hosting a dinner, but I heard he stepped out for a bit." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Something about his greenhouse, though it's an odd time for gardening, don't you think?" Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene but her mind alight. A dinner provided an alibi, but a brief absence offered opportunity. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Mayer, who had slipped away from a banquet to steal a rival's trophy. His absence unnoticed amid the clink of glasses. She approached Vane again, this time near a window overlooking the estate's grounds. "Your gardens are lovely, Sir Reginald," she said, her tone admiring. "Do you tend them yourself?" "I heard you have a greenhouse." Vane's eyes narrowed, but he recovered quickly. "A hobby," he said. "I checked on some orchids during the fete, nothing more. My guests kept me busy otherwise." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tightened on his teacup, the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow. She thanked him and moved to the window, her eyes scanning the grounds. The black van was gone, but the chauffeur now stood near the stables, smoking a cigarette. His navy jacket matched the fragment Miss Marple had seen in her mind's eye, caught on the observatory's hinge. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead poacher whose cigarette stubs had led to a stolen pheasant. Small habits could betray great crimes. "People," she murmured to herself, "are so careless with their secrets." As the tea drew to a close, Miss Marple took her leave, promising Mrs. Harrow to return for the next charity event. She walked back to Stargrove, the mist lifting to reveal a sky of pale blue. Vane's pride, his empty shelf, and his chauffeur's presence formed a pattern, but it was incomplete. Grayson's key, Clara's nerves, Brent's sketches, and now Vane's alibi. All were stars in a constellation that eluded her. In St. Mary Mead, a collector's obsession had led to a stolen painting, hidden in plain sight. Here, the telescope might be closer than anyone thought. At Raymond's cottage, she settled into an armchair, her knitting resuming its rhythm. The manor's opulence, Vane's cold smile, and the chauffeur's jacket swirled in her thoughts. "Collectors," she told Raymond, who was scribbling notes for a novel, "are like magpies, hoarding treasures for pride, not use." But pride leaves traces. Raymond laughed, assuming she was musing on village quirks, but Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. The telescope's theft was a bold act, and Vane's shadow loomed large. She would need to watch his traces and those of the others to find the truth hidden in Stargrove's quiet corners. Chapter 6. The Village Whispers. The sun had climbed high over Stargrove, burning away the morning's mist and bathing the village in a crisp autumn light that made the thatched roofs gleam like polished gold. Miss Jane Marple, her black shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, sat at a corner table in the Rose and Crown, the village's sole tea shop, her knitting bag resting beside a pot of Earl Grey. The shop was a hub of local gossip, its floral curtains and mismatched china fostering confidences as readily as the observatory's dome drew stargazers. Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and keen ears, knew that gossip was like a river, muddy with exaggeration, but carrying nuggets of truth for those who sifted patiently. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen silver teapot had been traced through a baker's careless remark. Here, the missing Dolland telescope might reveal itself in the village's murmurs. The tea shop hummed with activity, villagers and visitors mingling over scones and steaming cups. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her eyes scanning the room as she listened to the ebb and flow of conversation. At a nearby table, Mrs. Pym, the innkeeper's wife, held court, her voice carrying over the clink of teaspoons. "That Mr. Brent," she said, leaning toward a cluster of women, "always out sketching at odd hours. I saw him near the observatory past midnight, scribbling away like a man possessed." Her companions gasped, and Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind filing away the detail. Late-night wanderings, she thought, could be innocent or insidious, as she'd learned from a saint. Mary Mead poet who prowled at night to steal roses for his muse. Across the room, Mr. Tuttle, the postman, was regaling a farmer with a tale of his own. "Clara Finch, mark my words, was in a right state before the fete," he said, his voice low but clear. "Saw her arguing with Doctor Grayson by the observatory gate. Oh, 3 days back. She was red in the face, waving her arms about. The farmer nodded, adding that he'd seen Clara slip into the village hall during the fete, away from her post at the observatory." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, recalling a saint. Mary Mead seamstress whose heated words with a vicar had masked a theft to settle a grudge. Arguments, she knew, could reveal motives as surely as footprints. A third snippet caught her ear, this time from a dairyman at the counter. Sir Reginald's chauffeur, that Jenkins fellow, was parked near the observatory during the fete, he said to the shop's proprietress, Mrs. Lyle. Saw his van behind the hedge, bold as brass. Odd place to be, if you ask me, Mrs. Lyle clucked, wiping her hands on her apron. "That Vane's always up to something," she muttered. "His manner's full of queer things, and not all bought honest, I'd wager." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind latching onto the van's presence. In St. Mary Mead, a delivery cart parked out of sight had led her to a poacher's stash. Here, a van might carry more than garden tools. She sipped her tea, her eyes soft but alert, sifting the gossip for truth. The fete had been a whirlwind of activity, its chaos a perfect cloak for mischief. The telescope's theft, she reasoned, had occurred between 6 and 9 o'clock when Dr. Grayson left the dome locked and returned to find it empty. Each suspect, Grayson, Clara, Brent and Vane, had been present, their movements overlapping like stars in a crowded sky. Yet the village's whispers added new dimensions, suggesting tensions and opportunities she had not yet explored. Miss Marple beckoned Mrs. Lyle over, her smile as warm as the tea. "Such a charming shop," she said, "and so full of news." "I hear the fete was quite the event, though that dreadful theft has everyone talking." Mrs. Lyle, eager to share, leaned in. "Oh, it's a scandal, Miss Marple." "That telescope, worth a king's ransom, gone in a blink. I saw Clara Finch running about like a hen with its head cut off, trying to keep the visitors in line, and that Brent fellow, always scribbling in his book, makes you wonder what he's really up to." She lowered her voice. "And Sir Reginald's man, Jenkins, was seen near the observatory, though Vane swears he was at his manor all evening." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking. "People do get about during a fete," she said. "I suppose, Doctor?" Grayson was quite busy too. Mrs. Lyle snorted. "Busy?" He was flitting between the dome and the village hall, playing the grand host. "But I heard he's in debt up to his ears. Observatory's barely staying afloat. Makes you think, doesn't it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained serene. Debts, she thought, were as old a motive as envy, as she'd seen in a saint. Mary Mead Grocer, who staged a burglary for insurance money. As Mrs. Lyle bustled off, Miss Marple turned her attention to a young woman at a nearby table, Miss Daisy Turner, a schoolteacher known for her sharp memory. "Miss Turner," Miss Marple called softly, "might I trouble you for a moment?" Daisy, flattered by the attention, joined her, her cheeks pink with excitement. "I couldn't help overhearing," Miss Marple said, "about the fete. You were there, weren't you? Did you notice anything odd?" Daisy's eyes widened. "Well, I did see Clara slip. Away from the observatory around 7, she said. She was heading toward the village hall, looking flustered. And later, I saw Mr. Brent by the dome sketching, but he kept glancing at the gate like he was expecting someone." Miss Marple's needles clicked faster, her mind weaving these threads into the pattern. Clara's absence, Brent's watchfulness, the chauffeur's van, each was a clue, but none yet formed a complete picture. She thanked Daisy, who hurried off to share her tale with others, and leaned back, her thoughts drifting to St. Mary Mead. There, a stolen hymn book had been traced through a child's innocent remark about a stranger's cart. Here, the village's gossip was a map, its landmarks pointing to hidden truths. She left the tea shop, stepping into the bright afternoon, and made her way to the village green, where a bench offered a view of the observatory's dome. Settling there, she drew out her knitting, her eyes on the hill but her mind on the timeline. At 6, Grayson had checked the telescope and locked the dome. Clara was with visitors, Brent was sketching, and Vane claimed to be at his manor, though his chauffeur was near the observatory. By 9, the telescope was gone, the lock undisturbed. The fate's chaos had provided cover, but the telescope's bulk required planning. A vehicle, perhaps, and an accomplice. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, recalling a saint. Mary Mead theft, where a wheelbarrow had carried off a stolen statue under cover of a fair. The whispers painted a picture. Grayson's debts, Clara's argument, Brent's late-night sketches, Vane's van. Each suspect had opportunity, but motive was the key. Grayson might seek insurance money, Clara a chance to fund her research, Brent a collector's prize, and Vane a jewel for his hoard. Yet the village's tales were like stars, beautiful but scattered. Miss Marple knew she must align them, as an astronomer aligns a lens, to see the truth clearly. As she rose, a boy on a bicycle pedalled past, shouting news of a village meeting to discuss the theft. Miss Marple nodded to herself, her knitting tucked away. The meeting would bring the suspects together, their reactions a mirror to their secrets. In St. Mary Mead, a parish council had once revealed a thief's guilt through a nervous glance. Here, Stargrove's gathering might do the same. She walked toward Raymond's cottage, her steps light but purposeful, her mind a constellation of clues waiting to be charted. "Gossip," she murmured, "is like a starry sky. Lovely to look at, but you must know which lights to follow." The telescope's absence cast a long shadow, but Miss Marple was determined to trace its edges. Chapter 7. A Clue in the Dome. The afternoon sky over Stargrove was a canvas of pale grey, its clouds heavy with the promise of rain, as Miss Jane Marple ascended the hill to the observatory. Her black shawl was pinned tightly against a brisk wind, and her knitting bag swung lightly at her side, a quiet companion to her sharper thoughts. The village's gossip had painted a vivid, if scattered, picture of the telescope's theft, but Miss Marple knew that whispers alone could not solve a puzzle. Physical clues, like the footprints that had betrayed a saint, Mary Mead poacher, were needed to ground the speculation. Accompanied by Inspector Reed, a sturdy man with a no-nonsense air and a notebook perpetually in hand, she aimed to examine the scene of the crime with fresh eyes. In St. Mary Mead, a single thread from a shawl had unravelled a burglary. Here, the observatory might hold its own silent witnesses. The observatory's dome loomed above, its white surface dulled by the overcast light, and the heavy oak door stood firm, its lock gleaming as if mocking the theft it had failed to prevent. Inspector Reed, his cap slightly askew, unlocked the door with a key borrowed from Doctor Grayson, who had remained at the village hall to prepare for the evening's meeting. "Dr. Grayson swears this lock was untouched," Reed said, his voice gruff with skepticism. "Says no one could have got in without it." But that telescope didn't walk off on its own. Miss Marple nodded, her eyes tracing the door's edges. "Locks, Inspector," she said softly, "are only as secure as the trust we place in them." She recalled a saint, Mary Mead Verger, whose cherished key had been copied by a cunning chorister, proving trust a fragile thing. Inside, the dome's interior was cool and shadowed, its curved walls amplifying the faintest sounds. The telescope's mount stood empty, a stark reminder of the loss, and the polished floor bore scuff marks from the fate's visitors. Miss Marple moved slowly, her lace-up shoes silent on the wood, her gaze sweeping every surface. The air smelled of metal and wax, and a faint hum from the dome's mechanism vibrated faintly overhead. Reed followed, his pencil poised, ready to note anything she deemed significant. "You've a knack for this sort of thing, Miss Marple," he said, a touch of grudging respect in his tone. "Heard about that business in St. Mary Mead with the vicar's silver. What are we looking for?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Anything that doesn't belong, Inspector," she said, "or anything that should, but doesn't." She approached the telescope's mount, her eyes narrowing as she examined the bolts that had once secured it. They were clean, no signs of forced removal, suggesting care rather than haste. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead theft, where a stolen clock had been unscrewed with precision, pointing to an inside job. "Whoever took it knew what they were doing," she murmured, her fingers brushing the mount's edge. Her attention shifted to the door, where the lock caught her eye. Kneeling with surprising agility for her age, she peered at its surface, her magnifying glass drawn from her bag like a trusted ally. A faint scratch, barely visible, marred the brass, its edges fresh and sharp. "Inspector," she said, beckoning him closer, "do you see this?" Not a deep mark, but recent. A tool, perhaps, or a clumsy attempt at picking Reed squinted, his brow furrowing. "Could be," he said, "but Grayson said the lock was fine." "You think someone tampered with it?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I think, Inspector, that people see what they expect to see. A lock that looks secure may not be." She recalled a saint, Mary Mead burglary, where a scratched lock had been overlooked by a trusting constable. As she rose, her gaze caught a glimmer on a nearby hinge, where the dome's access panel met the wall. She leaned closer, her magnifying glass revealing a tiny fragment of blue fabric, no larger than a thumbnail, snagged in the metal. "Now, what have we here?" she said, her voice soft with interest. Reed peered over her shoulder, his notebook open. "Looks like cloth," he said. "Could have come from anyone at the fete." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind was racing. The fabric was navy, finely woven, not the rough cotton of Clara's cardigan, nor the tweed of Grayson's waistcoat. She thought of Mr. Brent's navy suit and Sir Reginald's chauffeur Jenkins in his dark jacket. In St. Mary Mead, a shred of silk had led her to a thief's borrowed shawl. Here, this fragment might point to a culprit's carelessness. She moved to the dome's base, where a narrow window offered a view of the grounds. The grass outside was trampled from the fete, but a single footprint stood out, pressed deep into a patch of mud near the wall. It was large, broad-toed, unlike the delicate prints of Clara's shoes or Brent's polished loafers. Miss Marple pointed it out to Reed, who crouched to examine it. "Big fellow," he said, sketching the outline in his notebook. "Could be a groundskeeper, or one of the fete's workers." Miss Marple's needles, now in her hands, clicked softly. "Or someone who carried a heavy load," she said. "The telescope is no small thing, Inspector." Moving it would leave a mark. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead theft, where a heavy candelabra had left a scuff on a lawn, betraying its thief's path. Reed straightened, his expression thoughtful. "You're thinking someone came in, picked the lock, and carted it off," he said. "But how'd they get it out without being seen?" The fete was crawling with people. Miss Marple's eyes drifted to the window, where the hedge-lined path to the village was just visible. "A vehicle, perhaps," she said, "hidden in the shadows." "Fetes are noisy, Inspector. A van could go unnoticed in the din." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Fair, where a cart had slipped away with a stolen statue, its wheels muffled by the crowd's chatter. They searched the dome further, but found no other clues. No dropped tools, no stray hairs, only the lingering sense of violation. Miss Marple paused by the empty mount, her mind assembling the fragments. The scratched lock, the blue fabric, the heavy footprint. Each was a star in the constellation of the theft, but their alignment was unclear. Grayson's key, Clara's nerves, Brent's sketches, Vane's chauffeur, all hovered in her thoughts, their motives as murky as the sky above. In St. Mary Mead, a single clue had often been enough to unravel a mystery, but here the pieces demanded patience. As they left the dome, Reed locking the door behind them, Miss Marple glanced back at the observatory, its silhouette stark against the gathering clouds. "Details," she told Reed, her voice gentle but firm, "are like constellations. Alone, they're just points. Together they tell a story. Reed nodded, though his eyes betrayed a hint of doubt. Chapter 8. The Collector's Secret. The rain that had threatened Stargrove all afternoon arrived in a gentle patter, cloaking the village in a silvery sheen as evening approached. Miss Jane Marple, undeterred by the damp, made her way to Raymond's cottage, her black shawl glistening with droplets, and her knitting bag snug beneath her arm. The clues from the observatory, the scratched lock, the blue fabric, the heavy footprint, danced in her mind like stars in a shifting sky, but they were not yet enough to illuminate the theft of the Dollond telescope. Sir Reginald Vane, the collector whose manor housed a treasury of scientific instruments, loomed large in her thoughts. His empty shelf, his chauffeur's van, and his brief absence during the fete suggested a pattern, one Miss Marple intended to trace with the precision of a saint. Mary Mead seamstress unpicking a faulty stitch. At Raymond's cottage, she found her nephew poring over a manuscript, his pen scratching furiously. "Aunt Jane," he said, looking up with a grin, "you're positively glowing with mystery. Have you solved it yet?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she settled into an armchair, her needles emerging like old friends. "Not quite, Raymond," she said, "but I'm beginning to see the shape of things. People, you know, leave traces as surely as footprints in mud." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead jeweller, whose secret ledger had revealed a theft. Here, Vane's secrets might lie in his manor's shadows. Determined to learn more, Miss Marple enlisted Raymond's help. His connections in Stargrove, forged through literary circles and village charm, proved useful. A discreet inquiry to Mrs. Harrow, the widow who had hosted the charity tea, revealed whispers about Vane's collection. "Not all his pieces are above board," Mrs. Harrow confided over the telephone, her voice hushed with scandal. "There's talk of artifacts bought from shadowy dealers, no questions asked. And that telescope of his, the one he showed off last year, some say it came from a dubious source." Raymond relayed this to Miss Marple, whose needles clicked faster, her mind weaving the gossip into her tapestry of clues. In St. Mary Mead, a collector's illicit purchase of a stolen painting had unravelled under similar whispers. Here, Vane's dealings might point to a bolder crime. Further inquiries, facilitated by Raymond's friend at the village archives, uncovered a record of Vane's recent acquisitions. A ledger kept by a local antiquarian noted the purchase of a 17th-century sextant from an unnamed seller, its provenance vague. The transaction, dated mere weeks before the fete, suggested Vane's appetite for rare instruments was unchecked by scruple. Miss Marple's lips curved faintly, recalling a saint, Mary Mead spinster, whose hoard of lace had grown through furtive deals. "Collectors," she murmured to Raymond, "are driven by pride, not just possession. A Dollond telescope would be a crown for such a man." The village meeting loomed, but Miss Marple's thoughts returned to Vane's alibi. Mrs. Harrow's mention of his absence during the Fates dinner, ostensibly to check his greenhouse, gnawed at her. The manor was a mile from the observatory, a distance easily covered by a swift walker or a discreet van. She recalled the chauffeur Jenkins and his navy jacket, which matched the fabric fragment from the dome's hinge. The footprint, too, suggested a man of his build, accustomed to carrying heavy loads. In St. Mary Mead, a gardener's brief absence from a fete had led to a stolen statue. His wheelbarrow the silent accomplice. Here, a van might have served a similar purpose. To test her suspicions, Miss Marple persuaded Raymond to accompany her to the manor's edge, under the guise of admiring its gardens. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the manor's grounds were quiet, save for the distant bark of a dog. As they strolled past the stables, Miss Marple's eyes scanned the gravel path, noting tire tracks that led toward a side gate. The black van was parked there, its rear doors slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of wooden crates inside. She paused, her knitting bag a pretext as she bent to adjust her shoe, her gaze fixed on the crates. "Curious," she said softly, "how a collector needs so many boxes." Raymond, catching her tone, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. A groundskeeper approached, his expression wary, and Miss Marple offered a disarming smile. "Such lovely grounds," she said. "Does Sir Reginald often receive deliveries?" "I saw a van at the fete, near the observatory." The groundskeeper, a grizzled man with a limp, shrugged. "Jenkins drives that van everywhere," he said. "Was there during the fete, fetching supplies for the master's dinner?" "Nothing odd about it." His words were casual, but Miss Marple noted the quick glance toward the manor, as if fearing eavesdroppers. In St. Mary Mead, a servant's hasty denial had led to a stolen candelabra. Here, the groundskeeper's nonchalance felt rehearsed. Back at the cottage, Miss Marple pieced together her findings Vane's collection, built on questionable acquisitions, suggested a man unafraid of bending rules. His absence during the dinner, the van's presence, and the empty shelf formed a constellation of suspicion. Yet his alibi held firm. Guests at the manor confirmed his presence, save for that brief visit to the greenhouse. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Mayer, who had slipped away from a banquet to steal a rival's trophy, his absence masked by loyal friends. "Pride," she told Raymond, "makes men bold, but it also makes them careless." As evening fell, Miss Marple prepared for the village meeting, where Grayson, Clara, Brent, and perhaps Vane would gather. The clues, the scratched lock, the blue fabric, the footprint, and now Vane's dubious dealings were aligning. But the center of the puzzle remained elusive. She recalled a saint. Mary Mead theft where a collector's pride had led to a hidden hoard, discovered only when a servant's loyalty cracked. Here, Jenkins might be the key, his van a silent witness to Vane's ambition. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, her mind charting the stars of Stargrove's secrets. The meeting, she knew, would cast new light, revealing truths hidden in the glances and silences of those who thought themselves unseen. Chapter 9. The Assistant's Burden. The evening air in Stargrove carried a chill, the rain having settled into a fine mist that clung to the cobblestones like a whispered secret. Miss Jane Marple, her black shawl wrapped tightly and her knitting bag a steadfast companion, made her way to the village hall for the meeting about the telescope's theft. The hall, a sturdy building of weathered stone, glowed with lamplight, its windows casting golden patches onto the damp street. Inside, the villagers gathered, their voices a low hum of indignation and curiosity. Miss Marple slipped into a seat near the back, her unassuming presence drawing little notice, but her eyes were as sharp as the needles in her bag. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen arms box had been traced through a tense parish meeting. Here, Clara Finch's nervous demeanour might reveal more than she intended. The hall was crowded, with Dr. Grayson at the front, his wiry frame taut as he addressed the assembly. "The loss of the Dolan telescope is a blow to Stargrove's heritage," he declared, his voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. Clara stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly, her dark eyes scanning the crowd as if seeking an escape. Mr. Brent sat a few rows ahead, his spectacles glinting as he jotted notes in his ever-present sketchbook. Sir Reginald Vane was absent, a fact Miss Marple noted with interest, though his chauffeur Jenkins lingered near the door, his navy jacket unmistakable. The scratched lock, the blue fabric, Vane's empty shelf, all hovered in her mind. But Clara's agitation drew her focus now. In St. Mary Mead, a young maid's fidgeting had betrayed her role in a theft. Here, Clara's burden might be heavier than guilt. After Grayson's speech, the floor opened for questions, and Miss Marple seized the chance to approach Clara, who had retreated to a corner with a tray of tea. "Miss Finch," she said, her voice gentle as a summer breeze, "you look quite worn out. Such a trying time, isn't it?" She accepted a cup, her needles clicking softly as she settled beside the young woman. Clara's lips twitched into a strange smile, her fingers tightening on the tray. "It's awful," she said. "The telescope meant everything to the observatory. I can't believe it's gone." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but piercing. "You were so busy at the fête," she said, "managing all those visitors. It must be hard to recall every moment, but you did such a splendid job, I'm told." Her tone was warm, inviting confidence, and Clara relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained wary. "I tried," she said. "There were so many people, asking questions, crowding the dome. I was with them the whole time, from 5 until after 8. I couldn't have seen anything." Her voice was firm, but her hands betrayed her, twisting a napkin into knots. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze lingering on Clara's hands. "Such a responsibility," she said, "and with your own studies too. I hear you're working on something quite ambitious. Variable stars, wasn't it?" Clara's eyes widened, a flicker of pride crossing her face before it clouded over. "Yes," she said, "but it's slow going. The observatory's funds are tight, and Dr. Grayson, well, he doesn't always see the value in my work." Her voice held a bitter edge, and Miss Marple's mind stirred, recalling a St. Mary Mead clerk whose resentment of his employer had led to a pilfered ledger. She steered the conversation carefully. "Funds are always a challenge, aren't they?" she said. "I imagine it's hard to balance your duties with your own dreams." Clara's shoulders slumped, and she glanced away, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "It is," she admitted. "My scholarship's at risk, and I'm barely paid enough to live. I hoped, my research might change things, but without equipment." She trailed off, her eyes glistening. Miss Marple offered a handkerchief, her gesture kind, but her thoughts sharp. Financial strain, she knew, could push even the honest to desperation, as she'd seen in a saint, Mary Mead seamstress, who stole to fund her sister's care. Clara dabbed her eyes, then straightened, her voice regaining its edge. "But I didn't take the telescope," she said, unprompted. "I was with the visitors every minute. Ask anyone." Her insistence was fierce, and Miss Marple nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. "Of course, my dear," she said, "though I did hear you stepped away briefly, toward the village hall." "Just a moment, perhaps?" Clara's face paled, her fingers freezing on the napkin. I needed to fetch more pamphlets," she said quickly. "It was only a minute, during a lull." "I didn't go near the dome." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though her expression remained gentle. "Pamphlets," she said, as if musing aloud. "How thoughtful." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead girl, who had claimed a similar errand to cover a theft, her absence timed to perfection. Clara's story held, but its edges were fraying, like a seam stitched too hastily. "And did you see anyone near the dome when you returned?" Miss Marple asked, her tone casual. "Mr. Brent, perhaps? I hear he was sketching there." Clara's eyes flashed with something like relief, and she seized the bait. "Yes," she said, "I saw him, near the gate around 7. He was sketching, but he kept looking at the dome, like he was waiting for something. It was odd." Her words tumbled out, and Miss Marple noted the eagerness, the way Clara's shoulders relaxed as she shifted focus to Brent. In St. Mary Mead, a maid had pointed to a rival to hide her own guilt. Here, Clara's accusation felt like a shield, but against what? The meeting resumed, and Miss Marple returned to her seat, her mind sifting Clara's words. The girl's financial troubles and her brief absence from the observatory were threads in the tapestry, but they did not yet form a pattern. Her quickness to implicate Brent suggested deflection, yet her distress seemed genuine. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to Brent, whose pencil moved steadily in his sketchbook, and to Jenkins, who lingered by the door, his eyes scanning the room. Grayson, now answering questions, avoided Clara's gaze, a detail Miss Marple filed away. In St. Mary Mead, a vicar's wife had lied to protect a secret, not a crime. Clara's burden might be similar or darker. As the meeting ended, Miss Marple lingered, watching Clara gather the tea tray with trembling hands. The girl's ambition, her resentment, her nervous glance toward Grayson, all were clues, but none conclusive. The telescope's theft required strength and planning. And Clara's slight frame seemed ill-suited, unless she had help. Miss Marple thought of the footprint, the blue fabric, the van. Clara's alibi covered most of the fete, but her brief absence opened a window, however narrow. In St. Mary Mead, a young woman's tears had masked a partner's theft. Here, Clara's distress might hide a collaborator's shadow. Stepping into the misty night, Miss Marple pulled her shawl closer, her needles tucked away. The village hall's lights faded behind her, and the observatory's dome loomed on the hill, a silent witness to its own loss. Clara's burden, Brent's watchfulness, Vane's absence, Grayson's key, each was a star in a constellation that was slowly taking shape. "People," she murmured, her breath misting in the cool air, "carry their secrets like shadows." But shadows always follow a light. She would watch Clara closely, her quiet observation as steady as the stars above, until the truth emerged from Stargrove's twilight. Chapter 10. The Visitor's Confession. The night had deepened over Stargrove, the mist settling into a soft drizzle that blurred the village's lamplights into hazy halos. Miss Jane Marple, her black shawl damp but her resolve undimmed, walked from the village hall to the Stargrove Inn, where Mr. Lionel Brent was staying. The meeting had left her with Clara's trembling hands and pointed accusations fresh in her mind. And Brent's calm presence in the hall, his pencil moving steadily in his sketchbook, had sharpened her curiosity. In St. Mary Mead, a newcomer's polished charm had once masked a thief's intent, undone by a careless word at a tea party. Here, Brent's measured demeanour warranted a closer look. Her knitting bag swung gently at her side, its weight a comfort as she navigated the slick cobblestones, her thoughts as precise as the stitches she wove. The inn's parlour was warm, its fire crackling with a cheer that belied the village's unease. Brent sat at a corner table, his sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the observatory's gate, his spectacles reflecting the firelight. He looked up as Miss Marple entered, his smile polite but tinged with wariness. "Miss Marple," he said, rising with a nod, "you're out late. Care for some tea to ward off the chill?" His voice was smooth, but his fingers tapped the edge of his sketchbook, a subtle tell Miss Marple noted as she settled into a chair opposite him. In St. Mary Mead, a fidgeting guest had betrayed a secret over tea. Here, Brent's composure might crack under gentle pressure. "Thank you, Mr. Brent," she said, her tone as warm as the fire. "Tea would be lovely. I've just come from the village meeting. Such a to-do about the telescope." "You were there," I noticed. Sketching away, her needles emerged, clicking softly as she began to knit, her eyes meeting his with a mild curiosity that invited confidence. Brent signalled the innkeeper for tea, then leaned back, his smile steady but his eyes watchful. "A sad business," he said. "I was taking notes mostly. The villagers' reactions, you know. Fascinating study in human nature." Miss Marple nodded, her needles a steady rhythm. "You do seem to observe closely," she said. "Your sketches are so detailed, almost like maps. I saw one at the fete, of the dome, quite remarkable." Her tone was admiring, but her words were a probe, testing the edges of his story. Brent's fingers stilled on the sketchbook, and he adjusted his spectacles, a gesture she had come to recognize as a shield. "Just a hobby," he said. "The observatory's architecture is striking." I couldn't resist capturing it. She sipped the tea the innkeeper brought, her eyes never leaving Brent's face. "You were near the dome during the fete, weren't you?" asked, her voice soft as a whisper. "Miss Finch mentioned seeing you there, sketching, around 7. A busy time, with all those people about." Brent's smile faltered just for a moment, and Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind latching onto the flicker of unease. In St. Mary Mead, a painter's hesitation had revealed a stolen canvas hidden in his shed. Here, Brent's pause might hide a similar truth. He cleared his throat, his composure returning. "I was there, yes," he said. "I told you before. I went into the dome briefly during the viewing at 6 to see the telescope. Miss Finch was explaining its optics quite competently. But I spent most of the evening outside, sketching the grounds. By 7, I was near the gate, working on the dome's outline." He flipped open his sketchbook, showing a page with the gate's ironwork, dated and timed with meticulous care. "See? Nothing out of the ordinary." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes scanning the sketch. The lines were precise, the perspective flawless, but a small note in the margin caught her attention. A measurement of the gate's width, inked in tiny script. "How thorough," she said, her tone warm, but her thoughts sharp. "You must have a keen eye for detail. Did you see anyone else near the dome? Miss Finch, perhaps, or Dr. Grayson?" She thought of a saint. Mary Mead surveyor, whose notes had mapped a burglary's escape route, not a building's frame. Brent's fingers tightened on the sketchbook, and he closed it with a soft snap. "Not really," he said. "The grounds were crowded. Villagers, children, a few strangers. But I did see a man by the gate, smoking. Looked like a chauffeur, in a dark jacket. He was leaning against a van just watching. I thought he was waiting for someone." His words were casual, but Miss Marple caught the deliberate emphasis on the chauffeur as if he were eager to shift her focus. She recalled Clara's quick accusation against Brent, and now Brent's pointing to Vane's man, Jenkins. In St. Mary Mead, a maid had deflected blame to a rival, only to be caught in her own lie. Here, the accusations felt like a dance, each step calculated. Sir Reginald's chauffeur, perhaps? Miss Marple asked, her voice mild. I hear his van was seen near the observatory. Brent nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. Could be, he said. I didn't know him. But he stood out. Too still, too watchful. I mentioned it to Miss Finch later, but she was too busy to care. His tone was light, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tapped the table, a rhythm of unease. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Vicar, who had deflected suspicion with a calm tale, only to be undone by a trembling hand. She changed tack, her needles clicking steadily. You must know so much about telescopes, she said. To sketch them so well, I mean. Are you sure you're not a collector, Mr. Brent? Her question was gentle, but it landed, like a pebble in still water. Brent's smile tightened, and he leaned back, his hands folding in his lap. No collector, he said, just an enthusiast. I study optics, their history. The Dolland was a masterpiece. I wanted to understand it, not own it. His voice held a note of sincerity, but Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, sensing a half-truth. In St. Mary Mead, a scholar's passion for rare books had masked a theft. Here, Brent's enthusiasm might veil a deeper intent. She pressed further, her tone as soft as ever. You were sketching at dusk, you said. A shadowy time, isn't it? Things can slip past unnoticed. Brent's eyes met hers, and for a moment she saw a flash of something. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. I suppose so, he said, but I was focused on my work. If something happened at the dome, I didn't see it. His words were firm, but his fingers resumed their tapping, and Miss Marple's needles slowed, her mind charting the inconsistency. His sketches, his presence, his quickness to point to Jenkins. All were threads in a tapestry that was growing clearer. She rose, thanking him for the tea, her smile disarming. You've been most helpful, Mr. Brent, she said. It's so easy to miss things in the bustle of a fete, isn't it? As she stepped into the drizzly night, the inn's warmth fading behind her, she felt the puzzle's pieces shifting. Brent's confession was plausible, but its edges were too neat, like a story rehearsed. His mention of the chauffeur echoed Clara's accusations, yet both seemed eager to deflect. In St. Mary Mead, a newcomer's tale had unravelled when his alibi clashed with a witness's glance. Here, Brent's story needed testing against the timeline. The village was quiet, its lights dimmed by the mist. Miss Marple walked toward Raymond's cottage, her thoughts weaving through the fates timeline. At 6, Brent was in the dome, Clara with visitors, Grayson checking the telescope. By 7, Brent was sketching, Clara fetching pamphlets, and Jenkins was near the gate. By 9, the telescope was gone. The scratched lock, the blue fabric, the footprint, Vane's empty shelf, all pointed to a plan. But Brent's calm, his sketches, his watchfulness suggested a role yet unclear. She recalled a saint, Mary Mead artist whose sketches had mapped a theft, his innocence a facade. Truth, she murmured, her breath misting in the cool air, is like a star, bright but often obscured by clouds. She would need to clear those clouds with quiet questions and watchful eyes to find the telescope's hiding place. Chapter 11, The Collector's Downfall. The morning sun broke through Stargrove's lingering mist, casting a pale glow over the village's rooftops and bathing the observatory's dome in a soft, almost forgiving light. Miss Jane Marple, her black shawl neatly pinned and her knitting bag of familiar weight, stood at Raymond's cottage window, her eyes on the distant hill, but her mind tracing the intricate web of clues surrounding the stolen Dolland telescope. The scratched lock, the blue fabric, the heavy footprint, Clara's nerves, Brent's sketches, and Vane's empty shelf had formed a constellation in her thoughts, its pattern nearly complete. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen candelabra had been traced through a single misplaced thread. Here, the threads were many, but they pointed inexorably to Sir Reginald Vane. Today, she resolved, the truth would emerge as surely as stars in a clearing sky. Miss Marple had persuaded Inspector Reed to convene a gathering at the observatory, a reconstruction of the fate's events to jog memories and, she hoped, unsettle the guilty. The idea, born from a saint. Mary Mead tactic where a parish meeting had flushed out a thief's confession, was met with Reed's gruff approval. "If you think it'll shake something loose, Miss Marple," he'd said, "I'm game." Now, as she approached the observatory, the air crisp and the grass still damp from last night's drizzle, she felt the quiet thrill of a puzzle nearing its solution. Her needles, tucked in her bag, were silent, but her mind clicked with the rhythm of certainty. The observatory's dome loomed above, its door ajar, as Reed ushered in the suspects. Doctor Grayson, his spectacles slipping with nervous agitation. Clara Finch, her hands twisting a handkerchief. Mr. Brent, his sketchbook clutched like a shield. And Sir Reginald Vane, his silver hair immaculate, but his cold smile strained. Jenkins, the chauffeur, hovered outside, his navy jacket catching Miss Marple's eye, as she recalled the blue fabric snagged on the dome's hinge. The villagers, gathered at a respectful distance, watched with bated breath, their whispers a soft chorus of anticipation. Miss Marple stepped inside, her presence unassuming, but her gaze as sharp as a lens. Reed began, his voice booming in the dome's echoey chamber. "We're here to retrace the night of the fete," he said, "to see if anyone recalls anything new." He gestured to the empty telescope mount, its bolts gleaming accusingly. "The Dolland was taken between 6 and 9, and someone here knows more than they've said." His eyes swept the group, but Miss Marple's were fixed on their faces, noting Grayson's flush, Clara's flinch, Brent's stillness, and Vane's faint sneer. In St. Mary Mead, a thief's nervous glance had betrayed him at a similar gathering. Here, she watched for the same telltale signs. She stepped forward, her voice gentle but clear. "It's remarkable, isn't it," she said, "how a fate's chaos can hide so much." People milling about, music playing, shadows lengthening, but details you see have a way of standing out. She paused by the door, her fingers brushing the scratched lock. This mark, for instance, fresh, precise, not a clumsy break-in, but a careful one. Reed nodded, holding up a photograph of the lock, and Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Vane, whose hand twitched at his side. She moved to the hinge, where the blue fabric had been found. "And this," she said, holding up a small evidence bag Reed had prepared, the navy fragment glinting within, not Dr. Grayson's tweed, nor Miss Finch's cotton, nor Mr. Brent's suit, but a chauffeur's jacket, perhaps. Jenkins, visible through the open door, shifted uncomfortably, and Vane's smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. Miss Marple's needles remained in her bag, but her mind stitched the clues together, recalling a saint, Mary Mead burglary, where a torn sleeve had named the culprit. Turning to the footprint, she gestured to the muddied patch by the dome's base. "A heavy step," she said, "too large for Miss Finch or Mr. Brent, and not Dr. Grayson's size, but a man like Jenkins, carrying a telescope, might leave such a mark." She glanced at Vane, whose face was now pale, his fingers gripping his cane. The telescope, she continued, was no small thing to move. It needed a vehicle, a van, say, parked behind the hedge, as the dairyman saw. The villagers murmured, and Clara's eyes widened, while Brent's pencil stilled in his sketchbook. Miss Marple faced Vane directly, her voice soft but unyielding. "Ah, Sir Reginald, you craved the Dolland for your collection, didn't you? A jewel to crown your treasures, never mind its cost to others." Vane blustered, his voice rising. "This is preposterous." "I was at my manor, hosting a dinner. My guests will confirm it." But Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, undeterred. "A dinner, yes," she said, "but you stepped out. To your greenhouse, you said." "A mile's walk or a quick drive in your van to the observatory. Jenkins acted on your orders, slipping in during the Fed's distraction, using a copied key or a picked lock." She gestured to the empty shelf in her mind's eye, its gap a silent confession. Vane's face crumpled, his cane tapping the floor in agitation. "You've no proof," he snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Miss Marple turned to Reed, who held up a warrant. "We searched your manor this morning, Sir Reginald," Reed said. "Found a crate in your cellar, marked for a private vault." The telescope was inside. The villagers gasped, and Clara let out a small sob, while Grayson's shoulders sagged with relief. Brent's eyes narrowed, but he remained silent, his sketchbook forgotten. Miss Marple's voice softened, almost pitying. "Pride, Sir Reginald, is a dangerous thing. You couldn't resist the Dolland, could you? Like a magpie with a shining trinket." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead collector whose obsession with rare coins had led to a theft, his downfall sealed by a hidden stash. Vane's lips trembled, and he sank onto a bench, his defiance gone. "It was perfection," he muttered. "I meant to keep it safe, to admire it." Jenkins only followed, orders Jenkins outside, hung his head, and Reed signalled a constable to detain him. As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple stepped outside, the sun breaking through the clouds. Clara approached, her eyes wet. "I'm sorry," she said. "I suspected, but I was afraid to speak." Miss Marple patted her hand, recalling a saint, Mary Mead girl, whose fear had silenced her until the truth emerged. Brent, passing by, nodded curtly, his sketches no longer a shield. Grayson, clutching the recovered telescope's crate, wept openly, his observatory restored. Miss Marple walked down the hill, her shawl catching the breeze. The puzzle was complete, its pieces aligned by quiet observation and the village's own whispers. "People," she murmured, her knitting bag swinging gently, "shine brightly, but their shadows tell the tale." The telescope would return to its mount, and Stargrove's stars would shine untroubled once more. Chapter 12. The Stars Align. The morning after the observatory gathering, Stargrove awoke to a sky of unblemished blue, as if the heavens themselves rejoiced at the return of the Dolland telescope. Miss Jane Marple sat in the cosy parlour of her nephew Raymond's cottage, a cup of tea steaming beside her, and her knitting bag open, its needles weaving a soft rhythm that matched the calm of the village. The telescope, recovered from Sir Reginald Vane's cellar, was back in its rightful place, its lenses gleaming once more under the observatory's dome. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts lingered on the human constellation that had unravelled the mystery, Grayson's relief, Clara's apology, Brent's silence, and Vane's confession. In St. Mary Mead, a stolen silver tray had been restored through quiet observation. Here, the telescope's return was a triumph of the same patient scrutiny. Raymond, sprawled in an armchair with his manuscript forgotten, was brimming with questions. "Aunt Jane," he said, his eyes alight with admiration, "how did you know it was vain?" I thought Brent was the sly one, with all his sketching. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her needles clicking steadily. "People, Raymond," she said, "are like stars. They shine brightly, but their secrets are revealed in the quiet of observation. Sir Reginald's pride was his undoing, just as a saint. Mary Meadmere's vanity led to a pilfered trophy. She sipped her tea, her mind retracing the threads that had woven the truth. The village was abuzz with the news, the tea shop and inn humming with tales of Vane's downfall. Dr. Grayson, reinvigorated, had spent the morning polishing the telescope, his financial woes temporarily forgotten in the glow of its return. Clara Finch, freed from her nervous burden, had confessed to Miss Marple over tea that she'd suspected Vane's chauffeur Jenkins, but feared speaking out, lest she jeopardize her position. "I saw him near the dome," she'd admitted, her voice soft with shame, "but I thought no one would believe me." Miss Marple had patted her hand, recalling a saint, Mary Mead girl, whose silence had shielded a thief until kindness drew out her truth. Mr. Brent, packing his bags at the inn, had offered Miss Marple a curt nod when she passed him in the village square. "I'll stick to stargazing from now on," he'd said, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. His curiosity, Miss Marple suspected, was genuine, but his watchfulness had bordered on complicity, a shadow she chose not to pursue. In St. Mary Mead, a nosy scholar had once escaped blame for a theft, his guilt unproven, but his caution a lesson. Here, Brent's departure was enough. Sir Reginald Vane, now in custody with Jenkins, faced charges that would dim his manor's lustre. The crate in his cellar marked for a private vault had held the telescope, wrapped in velvet like a trophy. His confession, wrung from pride's collapse, echoed a saint. Mary Mead collector who had wept over stolen coins, his obsession laid bare. Miss Marple, reflecting on Vane's cold smile and empty shelf, felt a pang of pity. "Pride," she told Raymond, "is a heavy burden. It blinds men to the cost of their desires." As noon approached, Miss Marple strolled to the village green, where children played and the observatory stood sentinel on its hill. The Fed's banners were gone, the chaos of that night replaced by Stargrove's quiet rhythm. She settled on a bench, her knitting resuming, her eyes on the dome, but her thoughts on the puzzle now solved. The scratched lock, the blue fabric, the footprint, the van, each clue had been a star, its light faint but true. Clara's nerves, Brent's sketches, Grayson's key, Vane's absence, all had aligned under her watchful gaze as surely as a St. Mary Mead theft had unravelled through a misplaced glove. Raymond joined her, his writer's curiosity insatiable. "You make it sound so simple, Aunt Jane," he said, "but how do you see what others miss?" Miss Marple's needles paused, her smile gentle. "I watch, Raymond," she said. "People are never quite what they seem, but their patterns always show through. Like a quilt, you see. Each stitch tells a story, if you know where to look." She thought of Saint Mary Mead, where every theft, from hymn books to silver, had taught her the language of human nature. The village clock chimed, and Miss Marple rose, her shawl catching the breeze. Stargrove was at peace, its telescope restored, its secrets laid bare. As she walked back to the cottage, her knitting bag swinging lightly, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle completed. The stars above, invisible in the daylight, would shine again tonight, and Miss Marple knew that wherever human hearts beat, new puzzles would arise. For now, she would sip her tea, knit her scarves, and wait, her eyes ever open to the patterns that others overlooked.